Hello, and welcome back to the Gnosis and Science Podcast, Episode 9. Today, let's look at the universe as a self-sustaining, self-correcting system in a state of criticality, and what this means for higher and lower densities of reality and subjective experience between these different layers. And what does this change in experience mean for the universal constants, like the speed of light, Planck's constant, and the fine structure constant and gravitational force? And how does our level of conscious awareness affect our experience of time and space? First off, what is criticality in a system? It is a complex system poised at the precise, often narrow boundary between different types of dynamics or states, such as order and chaos or stability and instability. It is characterized by maximum sensitivity to small-scale changes, high adaptability, and the ability to exhibit a complex large-scale behavior across all scales, known as scale invariance. It is essentially a universal organization principle that affects how systems emerge and behave across different fields. Everything from the rate of forest fires to mudslides, avalanches, earthquakes, financial markets, and even the spreading of disease operates along this same principle. So first, let's look at how criticality behaves in the physical world by examining its effect on ferromagnetic or magnetic material. So magnets get their unique property from all the atoms being arranged in a specific orientation, either up or down, producing a positive or negative pole. But once a magnet is heated to a certain temperature, called a Curie temperature, the atoms will start to shift their orientation. So if you zoom in, you can see it as these domains of north and south starting to merge and change and overlap. This is the same process of self-actualization, or bringing the subconscious into conscious awareness. The universe, God, the divine, whatever term you want to use, will apply an external pressure to bring subconscious karmic patterns into our awareness. We can see this in more detail with what is known as the Bach-Tang-Weinzenfeld sandpile model, where in one dimension a sandpile is created as a self-organized pattern of criticality, with the same pattern repeating at different scales. So just like how sand falls from an hourglass, from the top to the bottom, it will form a pile. So just imagine this again, but in one dimension, with each different colored pixel representing a different height of the sand pile. And once a certain height is reached, the sand tower will fall down to the next available space. Eventually, this creates a cascading avalanche type of effect, as this is the same process that governs avalanches, mudslides, and earthquakes. As I said before, this was the original intent behind creating this model, was they were trying to figure out these natural disasters and how to predict them. Now, going back to the idea, as I've discussed, where the soul exists along a scale invariant axis with different densities according to Snell's law, so different densities of reality, what most would call higher and lower dimensions, each existing within less and less linear time in relation to that individual conscious experience, and dependent on that consciousness's level of understanding of self, as this dualistic distinction between self and other, inside and outside, begins to collapse as we bring the subconscious into conscious awareness. This scale invariant axis is operating under the same rule as the path of least action, which I've already covered, but briefly, it's just the optimal curve that would be formed for a falling object to get from point A of pure potential to point B of fully expended kinetic energy. It's the optimal slope, and it's also the same path that light takes or energy takes. So we can see that the universal speed of light is not constant, but becomes faster and faster as it moves through less and less dense media. So along this path, this curve, just think there's different layers, like a multi-layered cake, and each layer is slightly less dense than the one above it, just like air and water. And then you see how light will refract an object that is placed in it, like a pencil or a straw. So if we think about the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence, which governs everything from the growth patterns found in the arrangement of leaves and seeds to pinecone scales and seashells in the flower petals, all the way down to the scale of quantum physics to create what are known as time crystals. So in quantum computing, this is used to help qubits avoid disruption. But it goes beyond just the physical world. The golden ratio is also directly tied to what we find aesthetically pleasing to the eye, used as a tool to achieve a harmonious and natural composition in artwork. So the Fibonacci spiral grows at this specific angle within our 3D density or our third dimension. But if consciousness at a higher density processes time differently, this time dilation will actually change the perceived rate of optimal growth, which is the golden ratio. The spiral that appears golden or most optimal from one density might appear too tight from a higher density of reality or too loose from a lower one. So as the golden spiral emerges from self-similar growth or maximum packing efficiency and minimal energy waste, but efficiency is relative to the flow of time, the number of available spatial dimensions, and energetic constraints. So a different ratio might produce what that density sees as optimal. Think of it like a song being played back at 2 times speed. These same notes, but at a different timing, and the rhythm will feel off. So we need to adjust the tempo to restore a golden feel. So at this density, time flows faster as our consciousness is more fragmented. But at a higher density, time flows slower, and the optimal growth spiral appears looser. This is where we get the crystal spiral, and that's crystal with a K. If you've heard about the crystal spiral, it is a concept in spirituality. Look it up. It's pretty interesting. So these criticality systems find their optimal growth rate for that density, with our higher and lower selves each having a different value that they find beautiful. As we raise our consciousness through several different means, we can experience this firsthand. either through psychedelic experiences with patterns that seem more perfect, or near-death experiences with geometry that can't exist in the 3D but feels more natural, or with people describing heaven and hell as more real or made up of colors one has never seen before or achieved through states of deep meditation. The deeper implication of this is that if the golden ratio is density dependent, it should apply to all universal constants as well, like the speed of light, Planck's constant, the fine structure constant, and the gravitational constant. So higher densities operate under different constants, different ratios, and different physics. This explains why mystical experiences describe impossible geometry, and why higher density beings seem to violate physics, what we would call deities or devas, and why enlightenment changes one's perception of reality. You don't leave the world of science and physics behind, but you are accessing a different realm of physics with different constants that is only able to be accessed through personal subjective experience and the subconscious. That doesn't make it any less real, it just means that science, due to its quantitative nature, is bound by the third dimension and cannot be used in that way to understand a qualitative higher dimensional space. So if we look at the actual mathematical formula describing the Bach-Tang-Weisenfeld model, we are able to map this self-organizing criticality to conscious evolution. First, there is the local height or variable energy state. In the model, this is the height of the sand pile. When applying this to consciousness, it is your position along the scale invariant axis, how much charge you carry at any one moment, your vibrational frequency relative to your baseline, which is determined by your subconscious, and how much spiritual tension or potential you have. It's similar to how a electron can go up or down in its orbital to match its energy at the time, but it will always want to return to its natural base state. So next is diffusion. This is the spreading interactions. It's the rate of information and growth processing, which is again dependent on whatever density you're in. So in the sand pile, this is how fast sand grains redistribute to their neighbors and the rate of cascade or avalanches. For consciousness, this is how fast insight and integration spread through a system on both a personal level of integrating the subconscious into conscious awareness, but at a larger scale, it's how ideas and information spread. So at a lower density, consciousness is fragmented. There is a lower viscosity or resistance to change. While at a higher density, information spreads more rapidly, but the viscosity is higher, creating a much greater resistance to this change. This is why in Buddhism, it says the devas in heaven have a harder time changing their ways. There is not enough bad to provide a contrast to incentivize growth and reflection. Think of it as these higher forms of consciousness as being stuck within certain parameters, like talking to an AI. This is also what it is talking about in a more modern retelling of Sumerian myth. In Sumerian and Babylonian legends and myth, it is said that their deities, known as the Anunnaki, had created a lesser group of deities called the Yi, who were said to act as laborers for the higher deities. And these lower deities were viewed as too lazy to do the work of mining for gold. So they created humans to do the work and mine for them. Now, I would hesitate to place the sole blame on the temperament of these beings when this inability to self reflect and find this hidden gold, I'm using air quotes for that, uh, is actually bound by their ability to self reflect and is both tied to their level of consciousness, but also the physics of their reality. So, again, the gold in this case isn't literal gold. They don't care about the element of gold. It is a fragmented symbolic representation of the higher dimensional concept of gold, which is enlightenment or higher truth. So the third aspect is a slow external drive with the external events that we experience slowly adding grains to our sand pile, slowly accumulating to the point of an avalanche moment or ego death, where repressed information is brought into conscious awareness. On a larger scale, these are things like planetary transits, yugas, and larger time scales, along with things like karmic debt or dharma, any kind of karma, be it good or bad, catching up with us, or past life patterns playing out in our everyday lives. And then lastly, we have a threshold, which is triggered dissipation or avalanches. So when a critical mass is reached, a cascade is triggered. On a larger scale, this is a piece of information from our higher self to our lower self, where we have a sudden insight or clarity or a download moment or revelation. While on a smaller scale, this is a sudden breakthrough reached in shadow integration, or a sudden pattern being recognized, or a repressed memory coming to the surface, putting certain subconscious patterns into context. So, to give a timeline of these events, it would be experienced in what I'll refer to as phases, with phase 1 being the slow accumulation phase, or internal driving phase, where life events happen to us with experiences piling up lessons that are not fully integrated, and there's a feeling like nothing's happening or perhaps stagnation. Phase 2 is local fluctuations or diffusion. We gain small insights and make minor adjustments to how we respond to the world, with integration happening largely beneath the surface of our conscious awareness on a subconscious level. The rate at which this happens per person depends on their level of conscious awareness and how fragmented it is, and how willing they are to learn, or just how stubborn their personality is. I can definitely say from my own experience that I am a very, very stubborn person. So it takes a bit. And usually this is the part where it just kind of cycles again and again. Now, phase 3 is a criticality threshold, which is reached. This is that one more grain or that last straw that breaks the camel's back. It's that tiny trigger that causes an avalanche. And again, I'm talking about a realization or an insight, not when you or someone you know finally blows up because we haven't taken the proper steps to deal with certain suppressed emotions. So phase 4 is the cascade or the avalanche itself. This is the sudden recognition of the patterns, its collapse, and bringing the subconscious into conscious awareness, and the lower self coming into more authentic expression and alignment with the higher self. Phase 5 is the new stable state, where you can't unsee what you saw. This is the higher baseline where a new normal is established, and the cycle repeats at a higher level or octave or frequency, whichever term you want to use. And again, these are density dependent for each person. So if someone is less awake and their conscious is more fragmented and repressed, the accumulation phase might take a very long time, possibly years between breakthroughs. And the diffusion is slow, with insight taking time to integrate, with avalanches being small and threshold limits being very high. While someone who is further along their path might experience rapid cycling in the accumulation phase, fast integration, and larger avalanches as the layers of the subconscious that are being brought into conscious awareness are more key and foundational to a person's identity. So with these lower thresholds, this is why at a certain stage, advanced practitioners on their spiritual path seem a bit touchy or on edge. They are far more sensitive to energy, both higher and lower, as they are rapidly trying to stabilize and also experiencing ego deaths back to back to back, usually within a short span of a few months. So I hope you found this video or podcast interesting, and I hope you liked tying in the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, and the Bakhting-Weisenfeld model to the evolution of consciousness and how it operates on the same principle of a self-organizing system of criticality. And if you're curious to know more, I do have a course on Teachable. I will put a link to it in the description. And if you liked the episode and found it interesting, feel free to leave a like and a comment. It helps with engagement and any kind of rating or anything. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.